Hello, and welcome to the fourth in this Building Better Teams series. We're going to look at the different stages of teamwork. The idea here is that you have an opportunity to recognize that teams operate differently as they kind of progress through their lifetime and how you can engage differently at different sections, and how having this understanding helps you really operate in a team environment. This was part of session two. I recommend that you look at the other sessions in this series to get an idea of the different things we've been talking about. Tuckman's stages of teamwork is a well-established model for looking at teams. This is kind of a seasonal, long-term piece. This is right from when a team is initiated and formed, where people are sort of recognizing that there's a challenge that they want to work together on, but don't have quite that clear vision, all the way through to the adjourning, which is kind of a parts breaking up, but also maybe kind of thinking through what the next step is. So maybe some people drop out of the team. Maybe they bring in new people, but they then look at a next project. So in the storming phase, this is where people really are bringing ideas together, different disciplines, different perspectives, questioning different things. We have a common challenge, but really, what are we doing and how are we going to approach it? Norming is where you've kind of built that agreement. You have a shared vocabulary. You start to really sort of point in one direction to say, this is how we're going to solve this challenge. Performing requires you to have gone through these stages. You can't jump directly from forming to performing. You need to go through the storming. You need to go through the consensus building that you see in norming. But once you've reached there, once you have a shared vocabulary, once you've agreed on your direction forward, that's when you can really get a high level of performance and really kind of move towards that adjoining space later on. In the short term, you have these sprints, and this is where you plan, you execute, you reflect, and you go back to a plan. You refine each time. The reflection gives you an opportunity to say, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, how do we move that forward? And you might, these, depending on what you're working on and depending on what the project actually is, these might be weeks, these might be months, but there is this iterative process where you kind of plan, execute, reflect. This is probably very familiar to a lot of folks who look at the scientific approach, where you develop a hypothesis, you prove or disprove, you conclude, and then you move to the next cycle. There has been work on specifically developing a model for this for team science, and this is sort of that development ladder, but it has many of the same aspects that you see in Tuckman's and in the short-term place. You have that ideation, excitement around this is a good thing to chase over. You have people who commit and kind of start to build trust. You understand the expertise that different people bring together, and based on that, you develop a shared vision. You'll notice that the shared vision is developed once you understand a little bit more about what's going on in a team. You build your shared language so you have a common understanding. You develop your roles. And that's really then when you start to kind of build this strength and you build this performance in the phase three, the team maturation. So think about where your teams are. Have you been through the stages? Have you done things like develop a shared vision? Have you developed your shared language? Or do you still think you need to work on these things? There's a great article that looks at the team workflows. It's in the handbook we refer to. And I'd encourage you to think about where you currently are. Pooled additive. This is essentially you have an input, you have your challenge, everyone takes that, they go away separately, and then you clump it all together at the end. Sequential. This is better. Each team member makes a contribution, but this is more like handing a baton in a relay race. Someone does something, hands it to the next person, hands it to the next person. There isn't a much feedback between the different tasks and between the different teams. Reciprocal. This is where you start to get that feedback. You get teammates who are asking you questions, who are asking for different things, and it starts to iterate a little bit more, and you get a bit more common space and language. And that's where I think a lot of teams would benefit from being. Intensive, this is a hard space to get to. it's difficult to reach this stage. It requires a lot of understanding. It requires a lot of work, but it is where there is kind of that shared understanding and things are being performed simultaneously. You're not getting kind of this feedback loop. You're just getting more of kind of a common playing field. And yeah, it it's one that is not common. So think about what kind of teams you're engaged in. Have you been through the right stages? Have you had kind of the storming and forming? Have you had the norming and the shared vision? What workflows are you operating in? What even maybe if you're in kind of the sequential, what would it take for you to be in the reciprocal? How can you help encourage that with your work? Are you asking questions? Are people asking enough questions of you? How can you start sort of building that into your day-to-day operations? Okay, that was a fairly short one. Next session is looking at how you can develop translational skills that will help you in things like moving from a sequential to a reciprocal mode of working. So see you then.